was not at the head table. Just so we made that clear. Never at the head table. I was usually within distance of where I could hear them talking through the microphone. So I wasn't out in another room, but at least, I made myself into the room to listen to what they were proposing for the marching orders at a national sales meeting or whatever it was. And so in a way, Jesus is looking here, and he's reminding us that if we do something for an outward show, to me it's a red flag. We probably all know people like that. Sad to say, I've probably been in that position, hopefully not knowing, but it's certainly the situation that we're here to serve. I was at, I can't think of the phrase now I was going to use, but we're here to serve in a humble way. That doesn't mean that we have to be trampled on or stepped on by any means. It simply means that we need to be able to serve in whatever capacity we've been given. And that's true at home, that's true at work, and that's true within the church. We all have different talents. If we all had the same abilities, it would become probably rather boring and one-sided. But so we see here with Jesus that they were watching, he was watching them as to how they were organizing, sitting around the table. And back then, at least according to what I read, the table or position, how you ate on the ground. They were probably sitting near or on the floor. And a lot of times the position in relationship to where they were sitting to the table had significant meaning. Again, I'll use my example. Growing up in our home, there was 6 of us kids, and it wasn't so much, where we sat around the table. For us, since there was 5 boys and 1 girl, it was where if it was fried chicken, you wanted to sit closer to where that plate of fried chicken was, or the potatoes. Because I really had a story one time when our kids were little. We were back visiting my parents, and my mom would make homemade noodles with chicken, and a big bowl and a big dish. And as they got passed around the table, my son Brad was the last one, and it was empty. And he says to my mom, he says, "Grandma, is this all there is?" Well, luckily she had a big kettle of it, a big pot of it, so there was more to it than just an empty bowl. So the point being is we have to think about what we're doing and why we're doing it, or what's the motive behind it. And in the case of the Pharisees here, their motive could have been for show and not in a good spiritual relationship with the Lord. I remember one lesson that Jeff had. This has been several years ago when he was serving in the, I think it was the Department of Defense at that time. And he was working with, I think, an assembly in France for a get-together. And the seating arrangement, as he mentioned, I think in his lesson, was very important as far as to the rank of the ambassadors, the military people, and others that were there. The seating arrangement was, I'm going to say, critical, as I understand it. And so it's worth knowing, but that ought not be our primary goal when it comes to serving the Lord. I mentioned before, I forget where I saw it, if you're busy rowing the boat, you're not rocking the boat. And to me, if you're busy working, you're not typically complaining. And so to me, that's just a good principle. We probably all have stories that we can relate to. I mean, I've shared with you some that as I was growing up, I think I made a comment to my father one time on the farm where I was raised. I didn't have anything to do. That was not the thing to say on a farm. So I was raking leaves out of the fence row around the yard. So I learned to be busy, and not like in the Army, just act busy, but to really be busy doing something constructive. And so we can all probably relate to that, but it goes back to the motive. Why are we doing what we're doing, and really to our heart. So I just think that's important. And as I look here, verse 11 in this example says, if anyone who exalts himself shall be humbled, and he who humbles himself shall be exalted. The principle is, if we're there simply to build ourselves up, that's a red flag. We need to be here to serve the Lord in whatever capacity that is. And so, those are just some comments along that line. And there will be some other scriptures here. As we look here, I'm reading my notes, and I'm doing a poor job of it. Let's turn to Matthew chapter 23 and verse 12. Matthew has some other examples that we see in Scripture, so it's not a one and done. And even if it was one and done, it would still be legitimate. But it's a point that's really emphasized with the Lord, is being humbled in spirit as we are faithful Christians. Matthew 23 and verse 12. And it simply somewhat repeats what we saw earlier in Luke chapter 14. Verse 12 says, and whoever exalts himself shall be humbled, and whoever humbles himself shall be exalted. So again, and this is just after Jesus had spoke about the woes to the Pharisees. He could see, he had the advantage of knowing what was in their heart. Sometimes for us, most of the time for me, that's not easy to see. People can fool us, and they can disguise their hearts. But Christ knows what's in our heart. We're not going to fool him. Aaron?
I don't know if you're going to go there, but Jesus washing the disciples' feet shows a humble spirit and the willingness to serve. Servant is not greater than his master, nor he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.
Correct. And I think we'll get there later.
Get there later.
But,
Sorry.
and if I don't, then we already know about that.
Well, so he was a great example for us.
Right.
That he was the Lord of the earth, made everything, but yet he was willing to serve others.
Right. We don't think of a king or a president bowing to that kind of servitude. In many cases, that may not be necessary, but was truly an ultimate example before Christ was going to the cross, an example of what Jesus expected of his disciples. So I appreciate the comments. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, Paul is reminding us not to do anything from selfish ambition. In James 4, verse 10 says, humble yourselves before the Lord. In 1 Peter 5, and the reason I'm pointing these out is that it's repeated over and over and over for the emphasis and the importance of it. Humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God. And so we continually see that as an example of how we're to live our daily lifestyles. Now, Believe it or not, I'm not perfect. Many of you may not know that, but I'm not. And so this is a reminder to me, to Steve, that I need to step back at times, probably every day, and realize that I'm here as a servant to the Lord. And some days it's easier than others. It's not the same every day. It's something that we really have to, a lot of times, assess what the situation is and make decisions based on that. But one of the basic laws, as was pointed out, is but the basic law in God's kingdom, for us to go up, is for us to go down. Not a play on words, but really to be a humble servant in the Lord's kingdom. So, kind of with that in mind, we start with humility. And again, I'm kind of looking at the lesson that the writer had. Was not really aware of this gentleman, but I think at one point Derek had mentioned him, Neil Lightfoot, who I don't personally know, but he's the author, has to be, of this lesson plan on the parables of Jesus. So, several areas we want to look at in our lives that should keep us humble. Because if we talk about it and don't apply it to our lives, we don't answer the question, so what? And to me, that's always an important question. Is so what, and what's the motive behind what's being done? And so the author here pointed out 3 areas. The first area was our physical weakness should keep us humble. And in Psalms 103, it talks in verses 13 through 16, we don't have to necessarily turn there, but it talks about we are here for just a short time, and so the goal is really to make the most of the time that we've been given. And I was just thinking about some things that I used to be able to do physically that I can no longer do. I just happened to be at the doctor in Rockford yesterday at ortho, and got a shot for my shoulder, and it seems to be working. But things, body parts that used to work more, and things that as I said, I used to do, simply don't try to do anymore. And that's the advantage of having 3 strong sons. So when they're around, they can help. And so, one example was when I was overhauling a tractor. It was a 6-cylinder diesel. Lifting the cylinder head off and up above my head was not a smart thing to do. But years later, I paid the real price for that. And so, again, our physical weaknesses should remind us that we're not here forever, and that we need to think about and make the most of the time that we've been given. And again, probably for each one of us, that could be different. Some may be the same, but it's just a matter of thanking the Lord, or for me, taking time to thank the Lord each day that I'm given, and appreciate what He's done for me, my wife, for our family, for the church here. The list can go on for the country. Because the one thing we want to remember is Satan is alive and well. He works to accomplish as much as he can, and he'll do it in whatever way he can, using whoever he can. And so again, for me, it's a reminder to take time each day that we're given to walk in faithful service to the Lord. And then the second, after the physical weakness, which again I'll speak for myself, I realize the next is the the mental limitations should keep us humble. It says, no matter what we know, there is always more to learn as well as practice. I'm gonna stop there because I got a little visual example. First year of college, which was back in the mid-60s, we had 1 year of training on how to use this slide rule.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, 1 whole year, first year in college, was learning how to do trig functions, logarithmic functions using the slide rule. And it would approximate, it would get either the first 2 or 3 digits for the solution so that you could more quickly, accurately come up with the answers. But again, you know, if you pulled one of these out today and asked, well, what are they? How do you use it? I'm not even sure I can remember how to use it. It had a holster, and as we walked around the class, they generally were on your belt because you didn't want to lose it. It was kind of the math tool of the day. I'm sure it could be sold as an antique, but I don't know if it would be worth much. And so, shortly after I graduated, they came out with calculators. $5, $10 for a calculator. And it could go multiple digits well beyond the slide rule. This was not cheap. I think, I'm trying to remember, I think it was more than $50 at the time.
Calculators weren't cheap either.
No, they weren't.
We were on the train station on the other side, and it cost like I'm just, after the slide rules, we learned slide rules, and then when we went to parent school, we chipped in to buy a calculator, it cost us $125.
Wow. Yeah, the first ones I bought weren't that expensive at work. They were small, but they didn't have a lot of scientific capabilities within the calculator. And so the point being, we spent a lot of time. Like I said, I had first year of college, and at Iowa State we had quarters, or excuse me, semesters. No, quarters we were on. 3 quarters for the year. And I had 3 quarters of using the slide rule. Not because I was a difficult learner, it's just that that's what they had. It was first year to use it for math. And then, as Brian said, then the calculators came out and made this thing extinct. And then, lo and behold, the calculators, and now on this little phone, I've got calculators that go into even more detail when I get into the math side of it. And so, when it comes to our mental limitations, just for my 60-some years, maybe close, not 70, 60 years of education, the transition has been really something different. And it's a reminder that no matter what we know, one thing is there's going to be somebody that knows more, probably a lot of people that know less, but in my case, the technology is always changing in what we do, especially in the math and business. Karen, do you have a comment?
Well, I think, some of us are older here. I think we need to strive to continue to learn. If we don't, I'm always amazed. If I watch Jeopardy, I'm like going, I don't know that, I should learn that. Or if I think of a question, I look it up. But they say you don't remember things that you look up on the internet. That you don't, for some reason, it doesn't
Retain.
stick. Yeah, it doesn't, you don't retain it. And I don't understand quite why that is. But I think we should always have the desire to learn more, and especially in God's Word.
Right. And serving the Lord. Some of the notes I've jotted down here, you know, sometimes what we've learned is appreciated by others, sometimes it's not. And so this kind of dates me, because the example I remembered from years ago, was I remember when I went out with Carl Harbach on giving baskets, food baskets at Christmas time. To help those that didn't have them. And the note I had made here is, I remember distinctly, a lot of the families were really appreciative of dropping, being able to give them food baskets the holidays. But I remember one household, and why, I don't know why I remember this, but as I followed Carl in, each carried a basket or sack of food, the couple in there didn't seem very appreciative. Basically, when we told them who we were with, what we had, oh, go put it on the table. Which we did. Laying on the table was a revolver. And for some reason, I still remember that. Not a thank you when we left. It's just set it over there, that's fine. And so we need to learn to be appreciated. Or we need to learn to serve whether we're appreciated or not. And being not appreciated is not an easy thing at times to deal with.
But God knows.
God knows, and that's the important thing. When we look around at society, though, so much, we don't really see that being emphasized, that God knows. Or at least my perception is not that. And so, not only do we have the physical weaknesses to keep us humble, we have the mental limitations as well that should keep us humble because, again, the country we're in, the advances that they make and how quickly things are developed and then go by the wayside should help us to realize to use the most of our time. And that doesn't mean we just say, well, we're going to work for the Lord and we're not going to do anything else. We do both. He expects us, as best of our abilities, to take care of ourselves as well as others who are in need. And sometimes those who are in need are difficult to ascertain. But we still want to serve to the best of our abilities. Questions, comments? Wyatt? Ron?
The art of appreciating things has been superseded nowadays by complaining and expect. People expect things, they want to complain about everything. They don't think they have to appreciate it. That's.
Yeah, good point. And that, the two
And
points
I
were-
realize that's a general statement.
Right.
But that is definitely a perception I get.
What was that again? Could you?
That the art of appreciation has gone away and replaced by selfishness and an expectation
Okay.
that everybody has to listen to you. And if you don't, I'm gonna complain about it. Rather than being happy for what you have.
Right. Or even being happy for what we don't have.
Well, that's true too.
McKenna?
I'm gonna go on to Ron. For me being at school, I'm in the, I'm grateful that I can help students in a position where I can. But it's really hard for me to help someone who's ungrateful, and especially someone that's with a need. And I was reminded of that from a dean, and a dean came to me to help a student, which I have a couple of times. And so the dean came back and said, so how is the student? I said, very unappreciative. And he was like, what? So he goes, I'm gonna start tuning in on this because I see you offer him stuff. I said, it doesn't stop me from offering it to him because he needs it. But he never says thank you. So he noticed it yesterday. Someone gave me a bag of food because they know I give out food for kids that need it. And I do snacks a lot. And they said, here's some stuff from our church. Someone works at Kellogg's. So here's cereal. I was like, thank you so much. Granola bars. So he stopped by my
door, and the dean saw him, and the dean came close to the door, and he says, Miss Brown, do you have anything? I said, you know, I got cereal today. And I gave him like 6 little containers of cereal and put it in a bag, and he just walked on out the door, and the dean comes in, and he goes, step back in here. And then he said, from this day forward, you're gonna say thank you. Why would you not say thank you to her? He goes, well, she knows I appreciate her.
Oh,
And it just really threw me for a loop, like, you know, he never says, he goes, he goes, turn back around, thank you, Miss Brown. And if you have some more, I'll take some from her. I said, okay. So,
No, thank you again.
yeah, I just want kids to know how to be grateful, because we just grew up. If we got a penny, we thank people over and over again, and that's very lost today.
it is.
Yeah.
You know, as you were mentioning, I remember back in the late 1990s, Honeywell here in town had us team up with Carl Sandburg students, and then later, next year was with junior high. And they would divvy up the kids, boys and girls, and they would assign us to encourage them by example of what we did at work, how important it is to be able to get along and work together, come up with solutions. And the young man that was with me was from near New Orleans, Louisiana. And he happened to see some of the ungratefulness of the kids in these teams groups. Some really wanted to work together, come up with solutions to it. There were problems to solve, but to work together to come up with a solution. And this young engineer and I that were with these, he says, you know, Steve, if I had that kind of disrespect to my teachers, my mother would box my ears. And I kind of, you know, we couldn't discipline them. The encouragement was to work to get them to work together. For that was the goal. And for some, it worked, and for others, it didn't. To me, a lot of this starts in the home.
Yeah.
If it's not there in the home, it's not likely it's going to be outside the home either. My father drove a school bus once I started 3rd grade. And for some reason, he said to me one time, if I hear that you acted up at school and you were sent to the principal's office, then you and I are gonna have a meeting. And I saw what my brothers got, so I was kind of a quick learner, because my brothers tend to take the rough horse, or I learned from my brothers, from my older brothers, that taking issue with mom or dad was not a thing to do. It just wasn't. I probably shared this with you before, but, and I know we may be getting sidetracked, but it goes along with the line of being humble. I don't know what I was probably 5 or 6, so two of my older brothers would have been maybe 9 or 10. They were 4 or 5 years older than me. I think they was feeding the pigs corn when they shouldn't have been. They just thought it was a game because you could throw an ear of corn out, and the pigs really enjoyed that. And they came running into the house and said, Dad is coming in from the field and he doesn't look very happy. And at that time, I think Mom had kind of got a wind of what they were doing, and she had straddled them both, had them both down on the floor. And my brother Jim, she had one earlobe in her left hand and Jerry earlobe in the right hand. And I learned from watching, you know, by example. And so being humble doesn't mean that we disregard discipline. Again, something that happens to me within the home. And I see a lack of that. And unfortunately, I really see a lack of it with our political leaders in this country. In most cases, it does not matter what I say or what I do, I have that right, without regard of the consequences for it. And that, to me, is a shame, what I see going on in this country. And so, to me, it's just the exact opposite of being humble. I work with people that are very, not only intellectually smart, but everyday smarts, and they are, I guess I want to say humble, because they're not arrogant, they're not overpowering, they're there to help one another. And to me, that's a real key, is to be able to do it without patting ourselves on the back. The Lord knows we do. He doesn't expect us to do something that we don't have the ability to do, but that doesn't excuse us from still being the best that we can be. And then the third point that the writer here makes, in addition to our physical weaknesses should keep us humble, our mental limitations should keep us humble. The third point was our moral weakness and failures should keep us humble. And I tend to agree with the author here. In Romans chapter 7, we'll turn there. Romans chapter 7.